It's about the not-so-friendly skies. Welcome to Freedom Alive. We will never forget what happened a few years ago with the COVID shot mandates. Thousands of employees were kicked to the curb and forced to choose between their faith and their jobs. But it's not over. Liberty Counsel's Vice President of Media, Holly Meade, joins us to discuss 3 significant lawsuits against United Airlines because it violated federal law and ignored their employees' religious freedom. I'm thankful to again be joined by my friend, Mat Staver, co-host from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, it's really concerning that an airline, especially after all the health issues that are happening with the COVID shot, would force their employees to take the experimental injection. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense that they're not caving. They're not resulting in settlements. They're going to wait until a court forces them. So there's a large class action lawsuit that's pending of those individuals that they said the accommodation would be that you would be indefinitely laid off without pay, without benefits, which is no accommodation at all. And there's these cases where people were just simply terminated. And we have a pilot of 26 years. We have a flight attendant of, we have a reservations specialist, supervisor, who worked remotely. Remotely. She's not contacted any employees. She's not contacting the public. And she was told, get the shot, irrespective of your religious belief, or be terminated. Well, she was terminated. So we have just now filed these lawsuits. So this case, you think COVID is over? And it was a long time ago. It was 6 years ago since it began in 2020. It was 5 years ago since these mandates happened on the employment side. United was one of the worst offenders, and it's still happening within United. And these cases and the tragedies of what happened 5 years ago in 2021 are still ongoing. But we're seeking justice, and we're going to talk about some of these cases and the impact that it might have.
There's a lot of information that we cannot wait to bring to you. It is a truth-filled episode. But Liberty Counsel's Freedom Alert is next.
There's trouble in the not-so-friendly skies. Liberty Counsel has filed a federal lawsuit against United Airlines on behalf of former employees whose religious rights were violated. The airline unlawfully refused to take part in the Title VII religious accommodation process and fired them for refusing the COVID shots. Each employee had religious objections to the use of aborted fetal cell lines associated with the experimental drug. One lawsuit is on behalf of a pilot who flew for United for over 25 years. Another is a former 26-year reservations supervisor who only worked remotely. And the third lawsuit is on behalf of a former flight attendant who served for 28 years. United Airlines violated a fundamental employment principle. They must accommodate sincerely held religious beliefs. Employers cannot force employees to choose between their faith and their livelihood.
Up next, Matt's interview with Holly Meade.
I'm excited to talk about this subject matter of United Airlines in the lawsuit that Liberty Counsel has filed with Holly Meade, Vice President of Media with Liberty Counsel. And Holly, this question comes up probably is, why now? This mandate went all the way back to 2021, and now this lawsuit, 3 of them actually on behalf of United employees. It's an amazing story that we want to talk about.
When you say you're excited, though, the whole subject just brings back this whole flood of memories to me. What we dealt with at Liberty Counsel. Thousands and thousands of people calling every day, every week, with struggling because their employer or their school was trying to force them to take the shot against their religious beliefs. They weren't giving them accommodations. And so that was quite a time in our history, and we had to bring in more people, and so it was pretty crazy. Yeah. But you say, you think that would be over. That was, 5 years ago?
5 years ago, 2021.
Yeah, and an airline of all places, what we're going to talk about. Remember we did a program on Freedom Alive with a pilot who had taken the shot, and fortunately he was just had landed before he had a heart attack because he had the COVID shot. So you think that would be a red flag to other airlines to think, this probably isn't a good idea to require our pilots and our other employees to take the shot.
Yeah, 2020 is when COVID really started, with a restriction on churches, places of worship, and businesses and others, and schools. And then 2021 is the mandates on individuals that worked in the employment. And United and American, but United was one of the first leading airlines to force their employees to get the COVID shot. Those days we'll never forget, because the phones rang from literally by the time you got there till the time you left. And then when you put them on the answering service, they rang all night.
And the emails
and there were hundreds
came
of voicemails that we had to go through in the morning.
Emails came in. We did conference calls every day with an attorney. It was crazy.
And I remember working with members of the United Airlines staff, many of them from around the country. This would have been now in the fall of 2021 when the mandates on the employer started to happen. And the Biden administration was forcing employers to get their employees with the COVID shots.
And remember, this is an experimental shot.
Right. So Liberty Counsel has just now filed 3 lawsuits on behalf of a pilot, on behalf of a flight attendant, and on behalf of a reservation person who worked remotely. She never even went into the office. And that just happened in December of 2025. So the question is, why did it take so long to file these lawsuits? Well, these things happened in 2021. They were terminated in 2022, early 2022. They filed with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You have to do that before you file a lawsuit. And the EEOC did not do anything under the Biden administration. They just let these cases sit there with no action.
Meanwhile, the people had been fired, kicked to the curb, no job.
So then finally, it was in the late fall of 2025 that the EEOC gave a response, said there's probable cause, that there's a violation of the law, and that's allowed us to file suit. So let's talk about the first one. He is a pilot, and he is a first officer, has been with United at the time of his termination in 2022 for 26 years.
And that's one thing, Matt, it really speaks to me. These are 3 long-time employees, loyal employees. They just kicked to the curb because they wouldn't take the shot.
Yeah, so we have, of the 3, we have 2 26 years and 1 28 years. The pilot was there for 26 years.
Highly qualified.
And highly
won all kinds of awards.
11 years as a Navy aviator who got Aviator of the Year award while in the United States Navy.
Right. He flew for 11 years prior to United Airlines for 26. So
yeah, so he was a Catholic. He did not want to violate his Catholic faith because of the aborted fetal cells, and so he asked for an accommodation, and they terminated him. And after 26 years flying for United, they terminated him. Now, the interesting thing, Holly, as we talk about some of these, and we're going to go through some of the individual ones here, look at all the exemptions that United gave to people. So passengers were not required to get the COVID shot.
Yeah, I don't think that would have gone over very well for business.
It wouldn't.
But you see, the masks were bad enough.
Passengers flood the aircraft, and they're right there by the flight attendants and the pilots, and they're not required to get the COVID shot, but the airline employees are.
Makes no sense.
So they're not required. Foreign-based United employees weren't required. So when a pilot or flight attendant flies from the United States to, say, France or Germany or England or some foreign country, the people on this side of the pond have to be vaxxed, but the people over there, the United workers over in foreign countries, do not. So when they land there, they're actually working right alongside other United employees that don't have the COVID shot.
Which is interesting because usually it's the opposite. When you go to a foreign country, you used to have more vaccines than in the United States.
So get this too, a jump pilot, somebody who is in another airline, not United, but they're just wanting to catch a ride. You've seen them where they get a seat and they ride them from A to B to either leave work or go to work. They get the free ride. A jump pilot sitting there with the pilots of United, who is with some other airline, and just as a courtesy, they're taking this person to this destination, does not need to get the shot. But that person sitting in the cockpit with United employees that are required to get the shot or be terminated.
You know, how about the contractors or caterers? They also were not required. So they're coming on the plane, probably loading food, interacting with employees, but they were not required to get the shot.
Yeah, they're not required. So you see them all the time as you're on the plane. They're bringing in food, they're bringing in other kinds of things. They're not required to get the shot.
Right.
And then employees of United who are in anti-mandate states, say, for example, like Florida, they're not required to get the shot. So they have all these exemptions.
And what about the pilots in the United Airlines commuter planes? United Express, they're not required. Now, what's the difference between them and the United Airlines? Doesn't
That's
make
right, and it
sense.
has the name United on it. It's
right.
a partner airline, but it is United Express. They're not required to get the shot. And obviously, they're landing at the same terminals, and they're using the same resources, and they're interacting with the same kinds of people as they're getting off and on the plane. They're not required to get the shot. So United was really coming down on these religious exemptions. And they were warning people, the CEO of United was warning people not to file a religious exemption. While they had all these other loopholes, it was like Swiss cheese. But for somebody who's been a pilot for 26 years, and because of his Catholic faith says, I can't violate that because I can't take a shot that's associated with aborted fetal cells, and they all were,
right.
He gets terminated. And then the other person, the flight attendant, I want to get to the reservationist last.
Yeah, that was interesting too.
But the flight attendant, the flight attendant is the same way.
She was 28 years, I believe.
28 years.
Yeah, flying with United.
But if she actually flew on United Express, she'd be okay.
Yeah, it just makes no sense.
It makes no sense. Or if she lived in Florida, she'd be okay. But they forced her to get the shot. She gave a religious accommodation request. She'd been with them for 28 years.
You know, and all this is going on despite all the evidence and the studies that are coming out regarding the shot. Again, it's experimental, but the studies are coming out even more now about myocarditis, cancer, and all the illnesses that are associated with this experimental shot.
Well, like you said at the beginning of the program, on this program here at a previous episode, we interviewed a flight pilot, captain, I believe he was, for American Airlines.
And if he had had the heart attack seconds before he landed, that would have been fatal for the whole plane.
Yeah, because the most critical time is takeoff and landing.
Right.
And when he's in that approach zone, he said, if he had had the heart attack at that point in time, it could have been catastrophic for the passengers.
Yeah, and praise God he had it after he landed, but still he had to deal with all the health issues.
Yeah, they had to have people give him CPR and put the pads on him. And then he went to the hospital, was there for a period of time, and he had a heart condition because of the COVID shots.
And of course, he could no longer fly.
He could no longer fly, so he was now medically disabled from flying.
So it's worth watching that program and seeing his story. That's just one example.
And what we're finding now, I know Liberty Counsel, we took some positions on the COVID shot, and certainly we've actually brought people on here like Dr. Peter McCullough, many other doctors, Robert Malone on this program, Freedom Alive, to talk about these issues. Regarding the COVID shots. Nothing that we actually said in any of these programs or what we said at Liberty Counsel have been contradicted.
Absolutely. And, you know, Robert Malone, of course, invented the mRNA platform, which is used in those shots, is not recommending that you take it.
Yeah. And so what we found was, you know, this is mRNA. It's an experimental, quote, vaccine. It's not a typical vaccine using a dead or weakened virus. It has catastrophic events that are long-term, and that these COVID shots compounded that, because what it did was it actually increased the amount of spike proteins in your body that caused all these other kinds of conditions, turbo cancers, myocarditis, pericarditis, very rare conditions, but now very common because of the COVID shots.
I mean, you're seeing these young kids, athletes, dropping over, worldwide athletes, great condition, dropping over because they'd had the COVID shot.
Well, these airline workers kind of fall into the same category, in my view, as some of the healthcare workers. During COVID, when some of the lockdowns were there and people in some different professions or work couldn't go to work. They were forced to stay home. These people were still flying.
Right.
They may not have had as many passengers, but they were still flying. The healthcare workers, they were still treating people. And they did that through COVID. The airlines didn't shut down through COVID. Healthcare didn't shut down through COVID. These were the heroes that were doing their work amongst all that propaganda and false information and scare tactics. And then they actually, because they have a religious conviction, they're terminated and they're not given an accommodation, even though they have airlines like this that have all this other Swiss cheese kind of thing, opportunities for other accommodations.
Right.
So here the flight attendant, 28 years investing her life, getting on and off aircraft, doing that kind of schedule, terminated.
Right.
And then let's talk about the person who does the reservation specialist.
Yeah, the third lawsuit is a 26-year contact center reservationist supervisor. Now she works remote, as you mentioned earlier. She never has any contact with any employees or any customers. She works on the telephone every day, remote, and they were forcing her to get the COVID shot.
Yeah, they're forcing her to get the COVID shot. So she doesn't interact with anybody. She's been working at home for her entire time. So when you call, say, for example, United in this case, and you're wanting to book a reservation on a particular flight, it may or may not be going to somebody that's sitting in a big building that has United on the outside. It's probably going to somebody like her. She's at home and it's routed to these people that are in their homes, and that's what she did. She would take reservations when you would call, and she would pull up the computer and she would process your reservation, and she did that from her home.
And you know, she's just one example. We had many, many people call us during that COVID time that say, you know, I work in my basement, I never go in the office, but they're forcing me to take the COVID shot.
Or
I'll lose my job.
Well, in fact, we actually have one in New York, a case that we have pending at the United States Supreme Court regarding what New York did, the Governor Hochul. And what New York did with regards to healthcare workers is pass a rule that told the healthcare employers that they could not even consider, couldn't even interact with an employee who request a religious accommodation. They had to deny them. They had to either get the shot or they had to be fired.
Yeah, but they'll give medical accommodations, but not religious.
But not religious. You couldn't even consider it. You couldn't even consider it. That's in contrast to Title VII, which Title VII is your employment law that says you can't be discriminated on the basis of religion. And so when you have a mandate like this that conflicts with your religious beliefs, you tell your employer, you have a sincerely held religious belief. This is my belief.
And by law, they have to accommodate you.
And then they have to accommodate. They have to engage at least at a minimum in that interactive dialogue. So let's talk about how we can accommodate you.
And that doesn't mean a permanent layoff.
Right. And so they, in New York as here, did not even attempt to accommodate them. They just terminated them. If you submitted a religious exemption, they terminated you. Now, there were some that they turned, there's a whole class of people in United where they said the accommodation we're going to give you is an indefinite layoff. The person that we were talking about in New York, very similar to this person worked remotely for 10 years, had an exemption to all vaccines for 10 years, and an exemption to the COVID shot, and then this mandate came in and was terminated. Same kind of thing. So you said that we've talked to and worked with other people that were remote. That's just one of many examples. Here you have a remote worker. She doesn't go into the office. She works at home. She doesn't interact with any other employees. She's on the phone. Why would you want to have her get the shot? There was pressure by the Biden administration, and there's funding attached.
There's a quota, yeah.
So with the hospitals and the healthcare workers, they got money from the federal government, especially if they classified you as having COVID, even though you didn't have COVID. They got an extra fee for that. They got a lot of money. Hospitals got very rich from federal tax dollars. These airlines, like United, they all had federal contracts.
Right.
They're transporting various kinds of things in addition to passengers. When they have extra space in their cargo section, they'll transport things for the federal government or for others to have an extra source of resources and income. The federal government with the Biden administration was putting pressure on the states, on the healthcare workers, on anything that they could bring their tentacles to that had any federal connection. If you had a federal grant, federal contract, which airlines do, most of them, they were putting pressure on them. And so you're right, it wasn't about health because they had all these other exemptions. They said, no, this remote worker who does reservations at home never goes into the office. Get the shot or be fired.
Case in point, our Doe's case, which we are asking the Supreme Court to take, that's an example. Governor Hochul has not budged. She's not known for knowing conservative views anyway. She has not budged in that. And I'm sure there's got to be some money going her way because of these COVID shots. Same example in Maine. We represented healthcare workers. Janet Mills, same thing, must be getting money because she is pushing these healthcare workers to get the shots, or they got kicked to the curb. And Maine is not exactly a place that's flourishing that people want to come in and work.
Well, in fact, in Maine, just like in other places, but Maine particularly, there's a lot of rural areas in Maine where they have a very significant shortage of healthcare workers. One of our clients in Maine, remember, actually was recruited from another state to come to Maine to actually fill that gap before COVID. And then when COVID happened, had a sincere religious belief, kicked her out.
They spent all that money to bring them in and then kicked them out.
Not only kicked her out, fired her because she didn't want to get the shot for religious reasons, but then also wanted to have her pay back the moving bonus. Maine was paying healthcare workers and nurses particularly as a bonus to relocate and live in Maine in the rural areas so that they could fill in the gaps of their depleted healthcare resources.
Right, and you had these senior centers where seniors are living, and if they weren't getting the COVID shot and those employees weren't getting the COVID shot, they were shut down. Well,
and also going back to New York, just kind of bouncing around with some of this in terms of the different kinds of abuses that we saw during COVID, and they're still ongoing, believe it or not, and that's why we're still litigating on behalf of people. In New York, we have nursing facility that has been in existence for 50 years. 50 years. It's a Christian-owned and operated facility. The people have a very strong Christian environment in the workplace. People select that facility because of its Christian environment. And that employer is told 100% of your people have to get the COVID shot. Well, they had religious objections to it. So they were going to be fined $1,000 a day per employee for every day they didn't get 100% of their staff vaxxed. And then they would also lose their business license. This nursing facility in 2021 had to close its doors. It's no longer in existence after 50 years. Some of these patients were memory care patients, and they had to be relocated to other facilities during COVID because of this nonsense in New York.
And of course, these people, number one, don't want to put an experimental shot in their body. And number two, all of these shots are associated with aborted fetal cells. So that hints why there's a strong religious connection with these people of refusing the shot.
Well, and beyond the shots here, we're certainly representing these individuals, and we just now filed a federal lawsuit. And the federal lawsuit, United has a in our complaint, if you read it, I wouldn't want to be United defending it because of the way they treated their employees.
3 lawsuits, actually, yeah.
Yeah, we have 3 lawsuits here that we just filed at Liberty Counsel to defend these long-term employees that were just kicked to the curb. United treated them terribly. There's also a separate class action lawsuit that's going on behalf of many, many United employees, whose, quote, accommodation was indefinite layoff with no pay.
That's not an accommodation.
That's their accommodation. We'll give you an indefinite layoff without pay. This falls outside of the class because they were just flatly terminated. They didn't get the indefinite layoff without pay, which was not a real accommodation anyway. But we're there to help and rectify and bring justice to these individuals. A lot of damage has been done. A lot of this can't be totally undone because they've lost their careers.
We can't allow the government to control our health. What happened in the former administration and probably previous to that, the government was trying to tell you, and when else has the government ever told you when you have to take a medical procedure? and they were pushing that. So you know there was financial incentives there. So you need to be aware, and I think this was a huge wake-up call to Americans and hopefully Christians.
It's a huge wake-up call.
To really look at what they're asking you to do.
Reevaluate what you put in your body.
Right, and take ownership of your own body.
And, I think we need to repeal the 1980s immunity that we have provided through congressional action to Big Pharma whenever they produce a vaccine. When they produce a vaccine like COVID or others, and that causes injury, there's no direct recourse for you to get compensation from the pharmaceutical maker, like there would be, for example, a drug, an opioid, that causes injury. They have absolute immunity. That has to change.
Absolutely.
But I would say also, people are still facing some of the COVID mandates. People are facing, obviously, some of the vaccine mandates in general, childhood vaccine mandates. And if you face some of those and you want to make a decision to not have that for yourself or for your children, and you get resistance, you can go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org, and you can call Liberty Counsel 407-875-1776. And we can walk you through that process and hopefully stand with you like we're standing with these people with United Airlines.
Absolutely. And we need to pray for these three, that justice will be served and that they will be compensated for this tragic loss.
Absolutely. Pray that justice will be done for not only these, but so many others that we represent at Liberty Counsel.
Matt, let's talk to the folks at home around the country. What is a viewer and their family to do?
Well, there's several things I would think. Number one, you need to do research on not just this issue of COVID, but also vaccines in general. There's a whole reevaluation process that has actually taken place. So what they tried to do during COVID, where they wanted to force everyone to get a COVID shot, actually backfired. There are more and more people that are questioning the typical standard mantra from Big Pharma and the typical medical systems about getting all these childhood vaccines. So the good thing is that we're seeing a pushback by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to reduce now the number of shots for children, from birth to age 18, is roughly 72 shots, now to down 11.
Amen. It is our honor to bring you at home, wherever you're watching around the country, Freedom Alive, the facts and the truth around key issues that are impacting our lives in amazing, big ways. In closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us here next time. You'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.